Good Shabbos. This week, I think it was only this week, in the news, Great Britain acquired a Hindu prime minister. I think we should just stop and look at that in terms of the course of history and diversity. The first non-Christian prime minister, if you discount Benjamin Disraeli, who was Jewish but was raised as a Christian, so he was a Christian. This is the first non-Christian prime minister in British history, and a role reversal from the time that India was the jewel of the empire and Indians could not have any leading roles in civil society. It's just a turning of things on its head. It's perhaps a significant event in the history of Western civilization, and a contrasting event to other parts of Europe where fears of cultural change and immigration are driving right-wing cultural protectionism and authoritarian illiberal democracy, notably, for example, in Hungary. I note that the president of Hungary is currently actually a role model for some American civic figures. Or perhaps this is not in contrast to those authoritarian, illiberal leaders of illiberal democracy in Europe. Maybe it's an illustration of exactly what those right-wing cultural protectionists are afraid of: the infiltration of Asia into Europe. In America, we too see forces motivated by these fears. I mean, we went through a moment where we had a president who was African American, and in this country, at one point, African Americans could hold no point of civic leadership. And now we see the rise of forces motivated by fears of cultural change. I read today that a recent Pew study found that 45% of Americans surveyed by the Pew Research Center believe that America should be a Christian nation. Although there seemed to be no agreement on what that meant. And in fact, many people did not want to see the specific things that would come of that. Most Americans wanted churches to stay out of politics, did not want America to be declared officially Christian, and did not want the Supreme Court to make decisions based on Christian religious convictions. So maybe those who want this to be a Christian nation don't really want this to be a Christian nation, but there is a felt sense of cultural loss, it seems, among 45% of the population, which is about the same percentage of Americans who today are both white and Christian. Both white and Christian. This week's Torah portion, Parshat Noach, Noah, the Noah story, is about the tearing down and building up of human civilization, about civilizational standards of morality, and perhaps also about pluralism. The Torah account begins with the statement that Noah was righteous, or maybe only righteous in the context of his generation. It has a little bit of a ring to it. Ele toldot Noach, Noach ish tzadik, tamim haya b'doratav. These are the stories or the accounts of Noach. Noach ish tzadik. Noah was a righteous man, tamim haya b'dorotav. He was wholehearted in his generations. Et ha'Elohim hitalech Noach. With God, Noah walked, hitalech, walked quite intentionally, quite intensively somehow. It's a very strange word for walk. But Noach ish tzaddik tamim haya b'dorotav. Noah was a righteous man, wholehearted was he in his generation. So was he righteous, or was he just righteous in compared to everybody else that lived at his time? Because we then quickly read Vatishachet haaretz lifnei haElohim vatimaleh haaretz chamas. The earth was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with ruthless violence, chamas. So things were not so good. So Noah is to build an ark to save some sliver of life and humanity, as the rest of terrestrial life is drowned in a flood. And after the flood, a rainbow appears. And the rainbow appears as a sign of a covenant between God and all of life, that God will not destroy the world again, at least not with water. So the rainbow is a sign of a covenant in Jewish tradition, a sign of a covenant with all life, with everybody. And the rabbis ask, if there's a covenant, a brit, then there must be mitzvot associated with the covenant, mitzvot associated with the brit, and which are incumbent upon all people. And what are those mitzvot, those commandments that all humans are to uphold? The rabbis list 7. Not to murder, not to commit adultery, not to steal, not to commit idolatry, not to commit blasphemy, not to eat flesh torn from a living animal. I suppose that needs a little explanation. That's how you would keep meat fresh without refrigeration. It's cruel. And to establish courts of justice. Now, we could go into detail around all of those, but that would take some time. And say that last mitzvah, the only positive mitzvah, positive as in thou shalt, as opposed to thou shalt not, that's a negative mitzvah, thou shalt not. Positive mitzvah, thou shalt. So we have 6 negative mitzvahs and 1 positive mitzvah. That 1 positive mitzvah, to establish courts of justice, is derived by the rabbis from all the other mitzvot. Since if society is going to punish an individual for violating any one of the other 6, then that society must have just courts of law. So that becomes a mitzvah incumbent upon everybody. So these are the 7 Noahide laws, the 7 mitzvot b'nei Noah, the mitzvot of the children of Noah. And without getting into the details of any of them right now, or what we might imagine them to be, the larger idea, it seems to me, is that all human beings are living in a covenant with God that calls them to act justly and righteously, and also with humility. Think of what is it that the prophet Micah says? What does God ask of you, O mortal? Love justice, do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. Part of walking humbly with your God, humbly means acknowledging that you don't know everything. So be careful before you start imposing yourself on everybody else. But in this case, everybody is called upon to act justly and righteously Well, Jews in particular are called upon to act justly and righteously and Jewishly. Non-Jews aren't called upon to act Jewishly. They have their own ways of being, their own covenants. But everybody is called upon to act justly and righteously. And the rainbow is a symbol of this universal, perhaps pluralistic covenant. Pluralistic in the sense that I just said, other people have their ways as well. In 2007 and in 2008, the chief rabbinate of Israel, which is not the most progressive Jewish authority, so the chief rabbinate of Israel and some leading Hindu authorities in India negotiated a couple statements of agreement that seem to fall along these lines. It's interesting and instructive to read these 9 points that they agreed on. The participants affirmed that their respective traditions, Judaism and Hinduism, teach faith in one supreme being who is the ultimate reality, who has created this world in its blessed diversity, and who has communicated divine ways of action for humanity, for different peoples in different times and places. The religious identities of both Jewish and Hindu communities are related to components of faith, scripture, peoplehood, culture, religious practices, land, and language. Hindus and Jews seek to maintain their respective heritage and pass it on to the succeeding generations while living in respectful relations with other communities. Neither seeks to proselytize nor undermine or replace in any way the religious identities of other faith communities. They expect other faith communities to respect their religious identities and commitments and condemn all activities that go against the sanctity of this mutual respect. Both Hindu and Jewish traditions affirm the sanctity of life and aspire for a society in which all live in peace and harmony with one another. Accordingly, they condemn all acts of violence in the name of any religion or against any religion. The Jewish and Hindu communities are committed to the ancient traditions of Judaism and Hindu Dharma, respectively, and have both, in their own ways, gone through the painful experiences of persecution, oppression, and destruction. Therefore, they realize the need to educate the present and succeeding generations about the past in order that they will make right efforts to promote religious harmony. 7th point, the representatives of the two faith communities recognize the need for understanding one another in terms of lifestyles, philosophy, religious symbols, culture, and so forth. They also recognize that they have to make themselves understood by other faith communities. They hope that through their bilateral initiatives, these needs would be met. Because both traditions affirm the central importance of social responsibility for their societies and for the collective good of humanity, the participants pledge themselves to work together to help address the challenges of poverty, sickness, and inequitable distribution of resources. And the representatives of the two faith communities also agree to constitute a standing committee on Hindu-Jewish relations. In addition to this addressing how we might envision different religious communities interacting with each other, I thought it appropriate to look at this statement about Jewish-Hindu relations on the week that Great Britain has its first Hindu prime minister. It's quite a, well, you might even say it's a religiously radical statement in the United States, given what's going on right now and the deep lack of respect that many religious peoples have for other religious peoples, especially those who want this to be a Christian society, because it means imposing themselves upon everybody else. At the end of this parsha, this week's parsha, is the story of the Tower of Babel, Babel. And coming after the Noah story, it makes an interesting addendum. It's short, so I can read it here. And the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. And it came to pass, as they journeyed east, that they found a plain, a flat land, in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And they said to one another, I should say again, this is after the flood. They said to one another, come, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone and slime for mortar. And they said, come, let us build a city and a tower with its top in heaven. And let us make for ourselves a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of humanity had built. And the Lord said, behold, they are one people, and they have all one language, and this is what they begin to do. And now nothing will be withholden from them, which they purpose to do. Come, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there upon the face of all the earth, and they stopped building the city. Therefore was the name of it called Babel, because the Lord there Balal, confounded, confused the language of all the earth. And from there did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. So the people strive to build a tower, a city, a civilizational structure that will hold society together, hold themselves together, but perhaps in one culturally monolithic form. Everyone will speak the same language. All public life will be centered around that tower, that city. Much speculation in Midrash has been written on the question of what was evil about this effort. What was the harm people were committing in building this tower? Was it perhaps the arrogance of trying to act in place of God? We'll make a name for ourselves. Was it that the builders of the tower cared nothing for the individual workers who were killed or injured in building the tower, so long as the tower itself was built? That's actually a midrash. As they're building the tower, they have to get things higher and higher. If they raised bricks up to a certain height and the bricks fell, there would be great anger and discontent. But if a person fell, that wouldn't really matter. So says that midrash. Perhaps I might suggest that what was wrong with the effort to build this tower was the underlying motive to eliminate cultural and linguistic diversity altogether, and to replace that diversity instead with one authoritarian, monolithic culture. Only one view, one language, one culture was to be coercively imposed on everyone. The antidote was God's intervention, not a punishment, but the gift of diversity. For we can certainly see in our Jewish experience, and it can be seen in Indian experience too, that when one group uses force or the coercion of numbers or power to impose themselves and their culture on others, they inevitably commit hurt and do damage. So let us celebrate the necessity of pluralism in order for society to be free, and let us take heed and not overlook or be passive about efforts of those around us to deprive us of that freedom. So I wish everyone a Shabbat Shalom, and we continue to look for meaning and relevance in these stories of the Torah, our central saga, the central saga of the Jewish people.